Now it's time for Culture Talk, where we talk about culturally relevant topics you can use to start conversations about your faith. And I'm joined today with astrophysicist Hugh Ross. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
You know, you have a segment on our website called Questions from Social Media, and you take on questions from social media. Anyone who has questions, whether they're skeptics or Christians or from different faiths. And kind of a common question that gets asked just in general, but of you specifically, was that there isn't evidence for the Bible's accuracy. And you address this question where the correspondent was specifically asking, what are some of the latest archaeological scientific discoveries that affirm the historical reliability of the Bible? First, I love that our audience is really asking some thoughtful questions. This is a very important question. So let's unpack.
Well, it's interesting. The context, it came from a Christian.
Yeah.
He said, my atheist friend says,
Yep.
there is no archaeological
right.
evidence to support what the Bible is saying.
Right.
And so what I did is I actually went through her website and said, here are a dozen articles
Yeah.
that talk about new archaeological discoveries that establish that the Bible got everything right.
Well, let's unpack two of those.
Okay.
So I looked at your list, and the ones that kind of jumped out at me were interesting because I want to see how they connect to the Bible, because we can say, well, here's archaeological evidence, but how are we fitting it in with pointing to the Bible's reliability? So one of them is about human migration. So what archaeologists have discovered about human migration have anything to do with the Bible and its reliability?
Well, it's Genesis 9, 10, and 11. And before Genesis 9, we got humanity in one locale. And when God says to Noah after the flood, hey, I told Adam and Eve to multiply and fill the earth. They didn't do it. I'm now telling you and your descendants, multiply and fill the earth. And you read Genesis 11, they said, we're not going to do this. We're going to build a city and a tower so we will not be dispersed over the face of the earth. And God says, okay, I'm going to knock down your tower and I'm going to scatter you over the face of the earth. And Genesis 10 basically describes in detail the scattering of the descendants of Noah over the different regions of the earth. We now have DNA evidence to sustain that really happened. It happened very aggressively and suddenly, and at the time that would be consistent with Noah's immediate descendants. And they've even been able to use the DNA evidence to describe the migration routes, which are basically along the south coast of Asia and the west coast of North and South America, and then on into Australia. And it's very rapid. We're talking less than 1,000 years for this migration to occur. And but it shows you that early humans were just as smart as we were. They figured out where the easy migration routes would be. And I grew up on the west coast of British Columbia. And I remember my dad taking me when I was a little kid out to this desolate beach. There's nobody around. It's pouring rain. He says, I'm going to show you how easy it is to survive here. So he actually showed us how we can get dry wood out of the driftwood, get it out of the core, build a lean-to. Lean-to is to protect the fire, not us. Got the fire going. Then we built a big lean-to for us so we could stay dry. Then he said, go out and catch the clams and oysters. There's your food. There's berries growing along there. The onions are all edible. The wild lilies and onions. So we had all the food we needed. And when you're walking along a coast, you're typically walking on gravel or sand, which makes for rapid migration. Your food's taken care of. So it's consistent with what the genetic evidence tells us, what the Bible tells us, that indeed humans were rapidly scattered over all the different regions of the continental land masses, and at the time that the Bible says that it happened.
Well, you bring up another one in your article, and it is about human origins. So what archaeological evidence about human origins also points to the Bible's reliability?
Well, it's interesting about that, Sandra, is you actually get a more accurate date for the origin of humanity in the Bible than we do the science. Now, the science has got carbon-14 dating, which is a direct dating tool, which establishes that humans have been here on the earth for maybe as far back as 45,000 years. 40,000 certainly, and maybe you can push it to 45. But to get another direct radiometric tool, you have to go back 250 to 300,000 years ago. In between, all you've got are indirect methods that have really big systematic errors. And so when you read the scientific literature, they'll say, hey, the date we have for the origin of humanity is 300,000 years ago. But if you actually read the fine print, it's 150,000 plus or minus 150,000 years ago.
Wow.
So you got this wide range,
Yeah.
very uncertain. What you get from Genesis chapter 2 is that God created Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and it tells us it's a location where 4 known rivers come together. It tells us where the rivers flow from, names the rivers, which we all know exist today. 2 are dry, 2 are still flowing. All 4 would have been flowing during the last ice age, because they would have all been fed by melting snow and ice. But they come together in the Garden of Eden. The only location where they come together is more than 200 feet below sea level in the Persian Gulf. But during the last ice age, that would have been above sea level. So it tells us, according to the Bible, God created Adam and Eve sometime during the last ice age. So can you be more specific? Well, the earliest archaeological evidence we have for humans, some of it is in the Persian Gulf area, some of it is in East Africa. There were 3 epochs during the last ice age where there was easy migration for humans to travel from one place to the other. There would have been a land bridge joining Arabia to Africa, for example. And the Gihon would have been flowing, and it would have been easy to walk up that back and forth from Africa to the Persian Gulf region. But those dates fall between about 60,000 and 117,000 years ago, 3 different epochs, a few thousand years wide. But notice, we're getting more accurate dates from the Bible than we get from the scientific evidence. But they're consistent. 150 plus or minus 150,000 years ago is consistent with the last ice age of 15 to 130,000 years ago, and actually something like 60 to 117 would be even more precise than that.
Wow. So there's a lot of numbers thrown at me right now, but it sounds like where one is not negating the other, but they're actually coming together.
They're consistent. They're both. So the scientific evidence, the best scientific evidence we have is consistent with what the Bible has been teaching. And also, brand new, is we're now finding that it wasn't just recent humans that had technology. Even people during the last ice age had technology, but it's only recently been discovered. For example, bread making, we can now date back to about 35,000 years ago.
Wow.
But it's the tiniest bit of evidence, because bread making would be far more challenging for people during an ice age than during an interglacial. So it's not surprising that it's difficult to find the archaeological evidence. But we're now beginning to find that what it says in Genesis chapter 4, that early humans were involved in reasonably sophisticated technology, actually is accurate.
And that technology is like making bread.
Like making bread, like making tools.
Yeah.
We're now finding evidence that the Inuit in northern Canada were harvesting stainless steel meteorites
Oh, wow.
and shaping them into sophisticated tools.
Wow.
So stainless steel cutlery
Yeah, sure, why
dates
not?
back at least 10,000, not 12,000 years ago.
Wow, well, thank you so much for that. So if you want to hear more from Hugh Ross, go to reasons.org and you can search for his blog, Today's New Reason to Believe, and you can also look for his articles on questions from social media.